By the end of this video, you'll know how to build an AI application that answers questions from a website without writing a single line of code. That's my hope. We are going to do everything visually. We're going to be using Langflow, which is an open source project. And I'm going to show you how to build this AI application, but my goal goes beyond that. I also want you to learn how every component works. So I'm gonna build it here from scratch so you see me doing it. I'm gonna try to explain the reason behind every decision I make. So when you finish this tutorial, however long it takes, you're gonna have everything you need to just go and do this with your own data, right? And use your own model for this. This should be fun. Here on the screen, I have Langflow. Again, it's an open source project. It's pretty cool. I'm going to be using the pre-release version 1.0. This has not been released yet as of right now. That's the version that I'm gonna be using. There are several changes from the current stable version. That's why I want to use the pre-release version. It's super cool. I've tried both. I really like version 1. I'm going to install that one. Now, to run Langflow, you only need to do a couple things. First, you need to install it on your computer, obviously. This is the command right here to install the pre-release version. And you need to have Python 3.10. So make sure your version of Python is 3.10. If I go to my terminal window, I'm gonna type Python version, I have the 3.10.11 version. So you need to make sure you are on 3.10 as well. Then you can run this command. I already did. I already have it installed. It's gonna take a few minutes to do, so I didn't want to do it here on camera. So I already did this. And after you install it, then this is the command to just run Langflow. And you'll see what's gonna happen. I'm gonna run it here on my command line. And when I do, this is going to open a web browser on my computer. Now I have here Safari. I'm just gonna grab that URL and I'm gonna go to Chrome because I already prepared Chrome for this. So I'm gonna close Safari here really quick. And you can see this here is the URL that you need to open in your browser. And that is going to show us actually, this is the one. It's the same one. Let me just make sure that's the case. Yes. It's going to show you the Langflow user interface. So when you start, you have nothing. This is what we're going to get. I'm going to start by creating a new flow. So if I go to new project, I'm going to use blank flow. We're going to start from the beginning. And this is what I'm going to get here. On my left, I have the core components. This is just a menu with everything that I can add here. And there are many components here. So anything that you have in mind that you could do, you actually can do it, right? It's very well organized. And there is a section that's called extended. And when you click there, this is just on and on and on, right? How many components you have. To start building, my goal, as I stated at the beginning of the video, is to build an AI application that answers questions from a website. I have a website and I want to answer questions from my website. So let's imagine that I want to build a chatbot where users that come to my website can answer questions, and the AI application is going to use the content of the website to answer those questions. It's a more modern FAQ, right? Frequently asked questions, that people can actually ask those questions online. To do that, I'm going to need a model. That's the first thing that I'm going to need. So I'm gonna go here to the models section, and you can use anything that you have in mind, right? So I have OpenAI here, I have Anthropic, I have Cohere, I also have Ollama. So if you want to use a local model or an open source model, like Llama 2 or Mistral, you can use it. Ollama is right here, so you could be using that model. For this demo, I'm gonna use OpenAI because it's the one that most people are familiar with. It's very simple to use. So here's my model here. I have an OpenAI. You can see that I can select which OpenAI model I want to use. I'm going to start with 3.5 Turbo. Let's see if this does the trick. It's cheap, it's fast. I'm gonna need to type an API key, obviously, and I can change the temperature, and I have an input here. Let me grab the API key and paste it here. So I'm gonna paste my API key, and here is an input. So I can type something. Let's say I'm gonna type 2 + 2 equals, and yeah, I can then run this component. Let's see if something happens. It ran, it says OpenAI built successfully, but I don't see anything on the screen, which makes sense because I need an interface, right? I need an interface to just display that output. In order to do that, there is a section that's called outputs, and there is a chat output. I'm gonna be chatting with this model. So let me grab this chat output here. And what do we have here? Well, we have the message that we want to output, and we have the sender name, like who's sending that message. Okay, so that's awesome. I'm gonna grab the output of the OpenAI component, and notice how outputs are on the right side. And in this case, I have the text output, and you get inputs on the left side. Anything that you can fit into a component is gonna be organized on your left side. So I'm gonna grab the output of OpenAI, and I'm gonna put it right here. I'm gonna connect it to the chat output. Whatever the model answers is gonna go into the chat output. Now, what is this chat output going to do for me? Well, it's going to enable this interface. Do you see how the run button is now enabled? Well, if I click on this run button now, I get this interaction panel where I can actually chat with the model. And that is awesome because that's exactly what we need to see the model working. So I'm gonna close this, okay? Because I don't have any inputs, so I cannot just pass any information to the model. But I typed 2 plus 2 here. So if I run this output, if I execute the output, the first thing that I want you to notice is that when you run a component, automatically you are running every component that comes before that component in the same chain. So in this case, the chain is the model and the chat output. So if I run the chat output, we're also gonna be running the model because it comes before in this chain. And if I click on the run right now, you will see the answer from the model. It says 4 because the question, remember the question is 2 plus 2 equals. That's awesome. But we need something else. Let's create the ability to ask a question, right? So I want to ask a question. I want the model to answer that question, and then we're gonna display it in the chat output. To do that, I can just grab a chat input component. So I'm gonna grab that here. Let's see what we got. So we got the message that we can type, and we got the sender name, which is gonna be the user. So the user is sending the message. That's awesome. I'm gonna grab the output of the chat input and I'm gonna fit it into the input of the OpenAI model. So now my chain has 3 components. A chat input, so I can actually ask something. Then that's gonna go into the OpenAI model, and the output of the model is gonna go into the chat output. If I run now, the whole flow is going to run, and now I can ask a question. You see how this is enabled right now. So I'm gonna say, tell me a joke. And see how it says the user asked, tell me a joke, and the model comes back saying, why did the scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. Just a bad joke. That's okay. This is the table stakes. So I have an input. I send that input to my model, and I capture the output from the model and display it on the screen. Table stakes. But we need more than that. Remember, what we need to do is answer questions from a website. How can we do that? How we're gonna be able to do that? This is what, technically speaking, we call a RAG application. RAG, R-A-G, stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation Applications. And in order for us to get there, I'm going to need to just create a simple prompt that is going to tell the model how to behave. In other words, I want my model to only answer questions from my website. I don't want the model to make up the answers, right? If I ask the model, what is the price? I want my model to just look at the context, look at the website and say, well, the price is this much. I don't want the model to be generating, a fake price. To do that, we need to create a prompt. Right now, what we have on the screen here, I'm not typing any prompt. I'm just passing the question directly to the model, but I'm gonna need to create a prompt to make that distinction to tell the model how to behave. So I can just grab a prompt. It's under input, under the core components. So I'm gonna just grab this prompt, paste it somewhere. By the way, just one thing, I've tried many different visual tools where you drag and drop components. Langflow by far is the easiest one for me to navigate. And that might be because they're using the mouse wheel and clicking and command and control. All of the key shortcuts are the ones that I'm used to. So that's probably why I feel that it's so nice to navigate. But it's great. You really have to try it for yourself. But it's very easy to just, go around and just zoom in and zoom out. It's very, very, very cool. All right, so I have my prompt, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm gonna click on this template section here. I'm gonna click there and open so I can edit the prompt. And I'm gonna say, answer the question using the context below. Okay, something like that. And then I'm gonna specify, well, context is gonna come here, and then the question is gonna be here. In order to specify the context, I need to pass a variable because I'm gonna be injecting the context into this prompt. I can just use curly braces, and I'm gonna say, well, the context is gonna be here. And I want you to notice, just by me doing this, automatically Langflow recognized that I need a prompt variable that's called context. It's basically taking whatever is inside this, right, inside the curly braces. So I need one variable to inject the context into the prompt, and I'm gonna need one variable to pass the question. So now I'm telling the model, please answer the question, and I'm gonna be specifying the question below using this context, right? And I'm gonna be specifying the context. Great, I have two variables here. So I'm gonna check and save, and now the prompt component changed. Now the prompt component accepts two more variables. One of them is the context, and one of them is the question. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna grab the chat input, the place where I'm gonna be typing my question, and I'm gonna be rewiring that. So instead of sending the chat input directly to the model, I'm just gonna grab this connection right here, and I'm gonna send the chat input to the prompt. And I'm basically connecting that chat input to the question variable here. So whatever I type, that will become the question. And I need to specify the context. I'm going to specify a fake context for now. I'm gonna say Mary is Susanna's sister. Okay, something like that. So that is the context that I'm going to be specifying. And the question is gonna come from the chat input here. And now the prompt outputs text, which is basically, it's gonna take that template that I created. It's gonna replace the variables using the inputs here, and then it's gonna output the whole prompt. So I'm gonna get this prompt template and connect that, the text, the output of that prompt template, connected to the input of the model. So let's review here really quick what we have. I have a prompt, I have a chat input. That chat input becomes the question of the prompt. I fixed my context for now. I just typed Mary is Susanna's sister. That's probably good enough. I'm taking the output of the prompt, passing it to the OpenAI model, grabbing the output of the OpenAI model and putting it or displaying it as a chat output. Let's run this whole thing and let's ask, who is Mary? And the model is gonna say, well, Mary is Susanna's sister. So this is actually working, which is great, right? It's getting that from the context, which is cool. So let me ask something else. Who is John? I don't know what the model is gonna say. It's telling me John is not mentioned in the context provided. Okay, that's cool, but I want something actually a little bit different in this case. Let me ask something more interesting. Something like, what is the Eiffel Tower? The Eiffel Tower is a famous landmark in Paris, France. Okay, so that's awesome. So this clearly is using the knowledge of the model to answer that question because there is nothing in the context that will help the model answer that question. And I don't want that to happen because I think that might create some hallucinations. So I'm going to change my prompt here and I'm gonna specify that I only want answers coming from the context. So I'm gonna go back to the prompt and I'm gonna say, answer the question using the context below. Cool. If you can find the answer in the context, reply, I don't know. Okay, this is much better. This is now asking the model to ignore any questions that it cannot find within the context. So anything that is not there, the model should now say, I don't know. And this is a simple prompt. People have created better prompts to do this. So I encourage you to find one online if you want to make it a little bit more, or if you want to improve it a little bit. But this should do it for us. Let's try now. Let's run it. Let's ask, who is Susanna? And there is we're talking in the context about Susanna. So yes, it's Mary's sister, so that's great. And now let's ask something like, what's the Eiffel Tower? And now we should get, I don't know. Exactly. So now the model is only answering questions that it can find in the context. So this is much better. All right, we're just getting started here. We need to get data from our website into that context. So we need to pass the data from our website into that context. So how do we get there? That is the question that I need to answer right now. To do that, I'm going to first save this flow. So I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna click on settings. And this is a flow that I'm gonna call sample. I'm gonna call sample flow and I'm gonna create a new flow. Okay, so I'm gonna create a blank new flow here and you'll see why. Because in order for me to answer questions from a website, I first need to load those answers or the content, not the answers, but the content of the website. I need to load it into a vector store database. What is a vector store database? It's just a regular database that is going to be indexing information using embeddings. So we're gonna get the content of the website, we're gonna chunk it out, we're gonna create separate chunks, and we're gonna generate embeddings for those chunks. And what that will allow us to do is find information by similarity. What that means is that when we get a question, we can find any chunks, any information, any documents in that vector store database that are similar to the question. And that similarity is going to happen thanks to embeddings. We can have two embeddings, compare how similar they are. The more similar they are, the more likely those two embeddings represent similar concepts or concepts that are tied to each other somehow. Therefore, if I generate the embedding of a question and I get a similar embedding from the database, there is a very high likelihood that that question is being talked about, maybe answered in the document coming from the vector store database. The first step that I need to do is load my website information into the store database. That is the first thing. So I need to get that data and put it in the vector store database. How do we do that? Well, there is, let me see here what we got. There is a data section here, and I'm gonna grab a URL component. So this component, it says, the documentation says, fetch content from one or more URLs. This is exactly what I need, okay? So this is the URL that I want to load information from. This is my machine learning program, the one that I teach. I'm gonna be grabbing this URL. There is a lot of information here, by the way, price and instructor information and what happens in a couple of sessions. So all of that information I'm going to use. So I type my URL here. And this component, of course, right now is not gonna do anything. It's just gonna fetch the information from that URL. Now I need to do something with that information. And what I'm going to do, there is a ton of information in that URL. So we cannot just grab unlimited text and store it as a single document in a database. And the reason we cannot do that is because then when we try to use that context to ask a question to a model, the model will basically blow up because the context window for the model is limited. We can only pass so much information to a model. Therefore, I don't want just to load the whole website in the database as a single document. I want to create multiple documents. I want to chunk the information from the website. So if this URL creates or loads all of the content in memory, I can go, and if I go to extend it, you will find text splitters there. So I'm gonna go to text splitters, and I'm gonna be using a recursive character text splitter to generate documents out of my website. So this is the way this is gonna work. It's very simple. You'll notice that here it says chunk size. So that means how many characters out of the whole content of the website, how many characters are we going to use to create a single document? And by default, it says 1,000 characters. That's awesome. So I'm gonna be taking 1,000 characters and cutting at that point. And I'm gonna be saying, okay, the first 1,000 characters, that is one document that I'm going to store in my database as an embedding. Cool. There is also here the overlap, which means like how back do we go after we after we get the first 1,000 characters, how back do we go to grab some other characters so there is certain overlap for the second document? And I'm saying 200. Well, by default, it says 200. You can change these. You can tweak those depending on your application. So in this case, what's going to happen is that the first document is going to go from 0 to 1,000. So we're going to grab, or from 1 to 1,000, we're going to grab the first 1,000 characters. Then the second document is going to go back 200, and it's going to start there for another 1,000 characters. And then it's going to go back 200, and it's going to start there for another 1,000 characters. So every document is going to have a little bit of overlap. If I get this, and I connect the output of fetching the content of my website, I'm going to connect that output to the input here. Notice there is a red dot. It might be a little bit smaller. Let me make it a little bit bigger. You see that red? That means that that input is required, right? So there is no default value for it. So of course the input is required in this case. So now what's going to happen if I run this is that I'm going to fetch the website content and I'm going to split it into separate documents. And the record here, what we get here are, by the way, when you hover over one of the inputs or outputs, it's going to give you information of what the next components could be, right? So this could connect with vector stores, with text splitters, with chains, etc., right? It's going to give you that information, which is pretty neat. So what do we do next? Well, now that I have all of those documents, I want to upload them to a vector store database. So how do we create a vector store database? Well, there is a section here that's probably called vector store. I'm closing these sections here. Vector stores. Here we go. So within vector store, you get a bunch of different options that you can use. For this video, I'm going to use AstraDB. It's pretty nice. So I'm going to grab that here. And I have an account for AstraDB. Very easy to find. Just type AstraDB. And if you just type that, you're going to find just where you can create it. I already have an account. I'm going to log in. So now that I'm here, I can just create a vector store database. I'm going to go to databases, to this section. I'm going to click on create database, and I'm going to type sample. That's the name of my database. The provider is going to be Amazon Web Services, and I'm going to pick the region US East 2, and then I'm going to click on create database. Cool. So this is going to take a few seconds. It's initializing that database. And when you have the database, you are going to need a couple of attributes to paste here. First, we are going to need a token. So AstraDB is going to generate a token for us so we can actually authenticate with the database. We also need an API endpoint. So we're going to have to grab that. We need to specify a collection name of where we are going to store this information. Within the same database, you can have multiple collections, right? To store all sort of information. So different type of information will go to different collections, which is awesome. And we need to specify the inputs. So what is the information that we're going to be sending to AstraDB to store? And we also need to specify embeddings. So what is the class? What is the method to generate the embeddings for the text? Let's figure out the embeddings first, and then we can worry about everything else. So let me start by grabbing an embeddings class. There is a section here called embeddings, and you can generate embeddings with whatever class you want. I'm going to be using the OpenAI embeddings. That's the class that I'm going to be using. I need to use the same OpenAI key. I can use any OpenAI API key that I want. I'm going to be using the same. I'm going to paste that OpenAI API key here. And then I'm going to connect this embedding with my AstraDB class. The reason we add this again is because when AstraDB is going to receive the documents, but AstraDB needs to generate embeddings to store those documents in AstraDB. So it's asking us, hey, what is the class? What is the function that we need to use to generate those embeddings? And this is going to become important later because at the time of searching AstraDB, we also need to provide a query with the embeddings class. So we use the same type of embedding during querying the database than we used here during insertion. Now I have the embeddings. That is cool. Let's go back to the database. Database is ready. It's a vector database. You can see it here. There is an API endpoint right here. This API endpoint, I'm going to click here, copy that endpoint, go back to Langflow and paste it here. That's my API endpoint. Now I need a token, okay? So somewhere within AstraDB, I should be able to generate a token. You can see it here, application tokens. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Cool. So generate token, I'm gonna click there. And now I have a unique application token. I'm gonna click copy, go back to Langflow, paste it here. So what am I missing here? Let me see. I have the token, I have the API endpoint, the collection name, I'm gonna call it sample, or maybe I'm gonna call it website. I'm gonna call it website because this is the information of the website. And I need to pass the inputs, of course. So what are we storing here? Well, we're gonna be storing the result of the splitter, right? Of all of these records are going to become the input here for AstraDB. So what should happen now? I have the URL, I'm gonna fetch that information, split it into chunks, get all of those chunks and pass them to AstraDB. And AstraDB is going to be using the OpenAI embeddings to generate the embedding. So if I execute this flow here, so far, what is going to happen is that I'm going to load the information from my website into AstraDB. Pretty cool. Let's try that out. So I'm going to go to the final component and I'm going to click play or run. And this is running everything that came before. Let's see if it works. Let me just zoom it out a little bit. This should take just a few seconds. It's basically generating or, it loaded all of the data, created separate documents, generated embeddings for all of those documents and saved them in AstraDB. All right, so everything worked. Let's go to the database and let's check the database. Just wanna make sure that explorer. Okay, there we go. We have a collection that's called website. If I click on that collection, here you can see the data, which is cool. Notice a couple of things. So we have 13 records in that database. That means that my whole website was turned into 13 documents because we chunked the website content. So I have 13 records. The dimensions of the vectors representing the embeddings are 1536. That's the number of dimensions. And that is what you should see if you use the OpenAI embeddings model. If you use something else, I think Cohere's embedding model is 4092, something around those lines. Don't remember exactly a number, but depending on the embedding that you use, that's how many dimensions you should see. Here is the table. You can see the vector. That is basically the embedding. There is an ID there, and there is the content that's behind that embedding, right? The content related to that particular embedding. And there is obviously metadata, where is the data coming from, etc., etc. You can also see the data in JSON format. This is pretty cool. You can see the content, the vector, sorry, I clicked on it, the vector, the metadata, you see the title of the page, the URL, etc. And you can see how you can grab information, let's say from a whole website, not just from a landing page, and all of that is gonna get reflected here. Even if you wanted to just cite the source where your data is coming from, you should be able to do it through that metadata. All right, so all of my data is now stored in my AstraDB database, or Astra database, I should say. And so this is cool. I'm gonna save this flow and I'm gonna go back to the previous flow. I'm gonna call this AstraDB, save it, and then I'm gonna go back to my collection. So AstraDB is the one that we just saved. I'm gonna open sample, edit flow. So what needs to happen right now is that I need to pass this context. Is not gonna be fixed anymore. This context should come from AstraDB. But the question is, what exactly am I gonna be passing as the context? Well, I'm gonna be grabbing the question that the user asked, generate an embedding for that question, search AstraDB with that embedding, return any similar documents to that question, and those documents will become the context for the chat to answer the question. Let's try this out. I need to search in AstraDB. That is a given. So I'm gonna go to vector search, and now there is an AstraDB search component there. This is the one that's gonna search the query from the user to return related documents or similar documents. So I need to pass the token. So I'm gonna go to AstraDB, I'm gonna go to the database. It's somewhere. Here is my database, here is my token. I'm gonna grab that token, I'm gonna come here, paste the token right here. I need an API endpoint, which is the same endpoint that we used before. I'm gonna grab it here, go back to Langflow, paste my endpoint. The collection name where we are gonna be doing the search It's called website. What is the input value? This is basically what question do you want to be searching within that database? What is the text that you're going to be searching on that database? That is the question that the user is going to be entering. So I'm going to go to chat input because we already have that. And I'm going to be sending the input as well to that input value. So notice that now the chat input, it's being used twice. We're sending that to the search on AstraDB, but we're also using that as part of the prompt. That's pretty cool. So now I need to specify the embeddings, and pay attention to this. We need to use the same embedding model that we used to load the data in AstraDB in the first place. That is the OpenAI embeddings model. So I'm gonna just find it here, OpenAI embeddings. Here it is, and I just need to specify, just make sure obviously that you're using the same model here. I'm just using ADA 002, and the OpenAI key, you just need to grab it and paste it here. So here is my OpenAI key, and I'm gonna connect embeddings with this. Okay, cool. So let me check again what's happening here. I have AstraDB search. I put the token, the API endpoint, the collection name is website. I think that's the one that I created, didn't I? That Explorer, yes, website. And I have the input value, which is coming from the chat, whatever the user enters as the question. I have the embeddings using OpenAI embeddings, same model that I used before. And the search type, I'm gonna use similarity. There's an order option there. You can keep it at similarity. This is awesome. So what AstraDB is going to return are records. So it's going to return the documents that are the most similar to the question that we provided. And those documents will be the context. Now, instead of just keeping this context fixed that says Mary is Susanna's sister, I'm gonna connect this record to the context here. And I think I have an entire flow now with everything we need to make this work. Let's test. Let's click on the run button, and now I can ask a question and see what happens. So let me go to the website, and I'm gonna try to answer a question. Let's pick something general, like what's the program about? I'm gonna ask a question, and the GPT-3 model, if this works, is going to connect to AstraDB and it's going to return an answer. The program is about teaching practical skills and insights to build machine learning systems that work in the real world. This is awesome. This is exactly information that's coming from the website. Let's go back to the website and do something else. I don't know, our live sessions recorded. I even have that same question in the website. So if I ask that here, I should get an answer back. Okay, waiting for the model to do this. Yes, we record every live session. You can decide when to attend classes live or catch up asynchronously later using the recording. This is awesome. So here is our flow. We're not done yet, but almost. Our entire flow. I have not written a single line of code, and I can answer questions from my website or any website, or documents or files. You can grab PDF files and you can load them into AstraDB and then search those files. Let's say you can do a lot without having to write a ton of code. But then the next question is, what do I do with this? Because this is running here on my laptop. Let's say I want to run that from an actual application where I can actually ask questions and return answers. So let's do that. That's gonna be the only itty bitty piece of code that I'm gonna write in this session here. So notice there is an API button down here on your right side. So if I click there, Langflow is gonna give you a bunch of different options to run this flow from outside Langflow. You can see how you can call it using a curl post, using the Python API, using Python code that you can call directly from an application. You can just create a chat widget on HTML and add it to a web page. So there is a bunch of stuff that you can do here just with this screen. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna create a very simple Python application that is gonna use this to answer the questions that we need. So here is what I'm going to do. I'm gonna go to Visual Studio Code, and I have a folder, and I'm gonna create a new file, and I'm gonna call that new file sample.py. Okay, it's blank right now. I'm gonna go to Langflow and copy all of this code. And of course, you need to be running this on a virtual environment that has access to Langflow, obviously. So you can see from langflow.load, import run flow from JSON. I'm gonna format this file. Here are some tweaks. I really don't like the tweak name here for this constant, this is basically if you want to pass certain settings, or make certain tweaks to the different components of your flow, you could just pass them here. I'm not gonna make any, so I'm gonna get rid of it. So just the code is a little bit cleaner, so I can just remove these tweaks. Now you can see that I'm gonna be calling the flow, and there is a name of the flow there. I'm gonna need that JSON file, so I'm gonna grab that JSON file in a second. And here is the input value. Before I even do this, I'm gonna comment this out, and I'm gonna make sure I have something like question. If I remember correctly, I've never done this, or haven't done it in a long time. You can just use input to just grab something from Python application. Let me run the Python application now. Enter your question, la, 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 la. And now I have the question right here. So now I'm gonna just turn this back on, and I'm gonna pass this input value. I'm gonna pass question right here. So what's happening? It says it's undefined. Oh, you know what? I just removed the line here, which I don't remember. I'm just not gonna even try to remember. I'm gonna grab it here. Okay, we're back on track. Now I need this flow. So you can go to Langflow and you can download this JSON flow. So I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna click export, and that is gonna give me this sample.json file, okay? And that sample.json is going to contain this entire flow. Something important when you click export is going to ask you whether you want the API keys embedded in that JSON file. So just be careful if you do that and you export those API keys into the JSON file and then you share that JSON file, other people will have access to that JSON file. Just make sure you don't do that. You can pass the API keys from outside using the tweaks. I'm gonna do it here just because it's easier for the video. I'm just gonna download this flow, boom, awesome. And now I'm gonna copy that flow to the folder where I'm running my Langflow application. Let's go back to Visual Studio, and now I have my flow right here. That's the JSON file that contains the flow. And here I'm just running the flow and grabbing the result right here. Now I'm gonna print the answer. I never remember how to grab the answer. I think is I'm gonna have to grab the first output here, but I don't remember what comes after that. So I'm not gonna even try. I'm just gonna print whatever comes in here, and then we figured out how to do the rest. Okay, so let's now run the application and let's see what happens. So if I run this, it's importing Langflow, it's asking me enter your question, and I'm gonna say, I don't know, who is the instructor of the program? That is my question. And now it's basically executing the flow, trying to grab that question from the database. And you can see here is the result. The instructor of the program is Santiago. That's me. So it's working. And if I wanted to make this prettier, you can see that I can grab result0.outputs and then grab maybe the first output. Let's see, .outputs, and then grab the 0 here. Do I need value? No, this is fine. Let me try again. So let me ask something else. How many hours of recordings? Let's see what the model says. Results, every session is recorded, so there are a total of 18 hours of recordings, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I need to print results. That's what I need to print. And now this should be completely working the way I want it. So what is the name of the program? I don't know. I don't even know if that information is there, but let's just try. What is the name of the program? The name of the program is not explicitly stated in the context provided. That is true. That is true. Let me try something different, but you can see now that I'm getting just directly the answer from the flow that I'm running. Enter your question. How many sessions are there? By the way, here I'm using GPT 3.5 Turbo. If you use a better model, you're gonna get better answers for sure. You can see now there are 6 live sessions in the program, which is true. This is exactly the way it is. This is working. This is awesome. So here I'm running the flow that answers questions. If I wanted to maybe load information to my database frequently or periodically. I could also just export the order flow that we created to load the data into the database and run that. The sky is the limit. Very little code, only just to run it from outside the application, but you can even run it without doing that. You can insert your whole flow and run it as part of an HTML application. You don't even need to write any code. I think this is just a great way to learn and to build applications without having to worry too much about code. But if you like code, something super cool about Langflow is that you can also create your own custom components and specify the inputs that you want the component to show, the outputs that you want the component to show. You can connect those components with other components in Langflow. You can do all of that. Behind Langflow, they use LangChain. So it's really, really powerful. And while this is a very simple application, like I said before, Langflow supports all sort of components that you can combine to create agents, complex chains, etc. Hopefully this video helps you out. Please give me a like or hit the like button below. That helps the algorithm and it tells me that you really like this type of content, and I'll see you in the next one.